teach, teach topics. I often teach a topic, and then people are looking for it online. So, uh, for review, that sort of thing. So the question is warming up food on Shabbos, which this is an important topic. So let me step back for a minute. Obviously, one is not allowed. There are many things that one is not allowed to do on Shabbos. Basically, the 39 categories of labor on Shabbos is what we can't do, and those 39 categories come from the construction of the temple. Whatever was done in the process of constructing the temple within these 39 categories of labor, that's what one does not do on the Shabbat, because the Torah tells us that even though you should build the temple, but on the Shabbat you should not build the temple. And so we learn from that Shabbat really is the process of not building the temple. In a certain sense, that's how Shabbos is structured. That's how the laws of Shabbos, the negative commandments, the do not commandments of Shabbos are structured. And so the forbidden labors are those things which were used to build the temple. And one of those is cooking. They would either to construct the temple itself, because they would cook certain plants to create dye, to dye the cloth for the walls of the tabernacle. When I say the temple, I mean the tabernacle in the desert, the movable temple the Jews had in the desert. Um, Also, there, of course, was a fire on the altar that was used to burn sacrifices. There were certain things that had to be cooked. So, in that sense, cooking is forbidden. So, obviously, cooking has to be done before Shabbat. So the question is, how do you warm up things on Shabbat? Um, so there are a couple of factors. One is um, the rabbis put certain limits on putting something onto a warmer, putting something into a state of warming, or taking something off and putting it back on, or even leaving something on from before Shabbat. So the two main problems, obviously, from before Shabbat, something is fully cooked. So there's a general rule called in Hebrew "ein bishul achar bishul," that there's no cooking after cooking. What that means is that once something is already fully cooked, even if you would heat it up and heat it, you're not cooking it anymore. It's already fully cooked, so you're not changing its state anymore. And so that's not considered cooking halachically. Now, there's a separate problem with lighting a fire. You're not allowed to light a fire on Shabbos. That's also, in fact, the Torah itself specifically says, "Lo tavaru eish b'chol mashvatechem b'yom Shabbat." You shouldn't kindle a fire in your dwelling places on the Shabbat. So, assuming, let's say, that there's a fire that you lit before Shabbat, could you put food on it? So if the food's fully cooked on a biblical level, you really could, because you're not cooking the food, it's already fully cooked. So what's wrong with it? Why can't I just take, food out of my fridge on Shabbat day and put it in the oven? So the answer is there are two rabbinic factors that stop us from doing that. One is called in Hebrew nireh kemavashel. It may look like you're cooking. And the rabbi said you shouldn't put something directly on a place where you usually cook, let's say directly on a flame, because it will look like you're cooking, and people may forget and they may cook. But you could put it onto a pot that's on a flame. Let's say there's a pot on a flame from before Shabbat of water, let's say. So you could put food on top of that to warm up, because that's such an unusual way of cooking. Or you could put it next to a flame. That's also permitted, because that's also not a usual way of cooking. Now, there's one other problem, which is that there's a fear that if the fire is accessible, if you can see the fire. Now, remember, in the old days, you had a wood fire. So if the fire is there and it's burning, so if you've ever had a wood fireplace, often the fire dies down. How do you get it hotter? The answer is you stoke the coals. And by poking the coals or stoking them or moving the wood around, that's how you make the fire hotter and you make it go up more. So we're also afraid of you doing that, because that would be forbidden biblically on Shabbat, because that's considered partly making a fire. And so we have these two problems really that come into play. Number one, the rabbis were afraid that if you put it into a place where it looks like you're cooking, you may come to cook. And the other is that that if the fire is accessible, assuming it's like a wood fire, you may come to stoke the coals, and that would be forbidden biblically. Because let's say the fire dies down, your food's not going to be hot. You may want to stoke the coals. So this applies to food if it's not fully cooked. Even if you put it in a flame before Shabbat, that flame would need to be covered somehow so that you don't stoke the coals. And certainly, if you're taking food and putting it onto a flame, that flame would need to be covered so you don't stoke the coals. But even if you put it on before Shabbat, that's a problem if the food's not fully cooked. If the food's fully cooked, we're not worried that you're going to stoke the coals. But that's only for when you put it on from before Shabbat. To put it on Shabbat, both factors taken care of. You need to have the flame covered so that you're not tempted to stoke the coals, and to you need to you need to somehow avoid the concept of it looking like you're cooking. So how do we do that? So there's a few ways. The classic way, when I was young, there was something called a blech. A blech is a Yiddish word. It's a flat piece of metal, and it would be used to cover the flame on top of a stove. Now, let's ask this question. Why can't you take food on Shabbos day and put it into your oven? What's wrong with that? So you kind of have both problems, right? One problem is the flame is not covered. You can see the fire. If it's maybe you can't. Maybe it's gas and it's covered, or maybe it's electric and you can see it. Or maybe the knob is an issue because today it's not so much, it's not a wood fire. So some people say maybe the knob is even more of an issue. It's an interesting question, by the way. Does covering the knob, does that work? You might intellectually, you might say that that should be enough because that would stop you from adjusting it. But because the tradition was from the wood fires that you cover you either push aside the coals or you cover them with sand, that you're really supposed to have the fire covered. Some people even cover the fire and the knob. So putting let's say food in an oven on Shabbos has both problems. Number one, both rabbinic problems. And if the food's fully cooked, it's not a problem of cooking. It's already cooked. And we say once it's already fully cooked, it can't be cooked more. But you have both problems, which are rabbinic, which is number one, it looks like you're cooking because you're putting it into a place where you usually cook, into an oven. And number two, the flame is accessible, uncovered. You might adjust the flame. So we need to solve both of those. So one way would be to cover the flame, let's say on a stovetop, cover it with a piece of metal. That was called a blech. So some people hold that's enough. Rabbi Avadia Yosef, great rabbi in Israel, holds that would be enough because that's already, it doesn't look like you're cooking. Usually you don't cook on such a thing. Rav Moshe Feinstein, others say that you need more than that. You would need something on top of that, let's say like an upside, some kind of vessel on top of that covering of the flame. Because covering the flame is not enough. You need to put the food on top of something because that's an unusual way of cooking. And so you could even take like a cookie tray, turn it upside down on top of if you had something to cover the flame, then you had another thing like a cookie tray, turn it upside down or a pot, put it on there. Obviously, if it has water in it, it'll have to be on there from before Shabbos, and you can put food on top of that. Which is where the what you've probably seen, which is an electric hot plate, comes into play. There's something, it became popular in Israel probably 30, 40 years ago. It's made its way to America. It's called in Hebrew a plata, from the English word plata, I guess, hot plate. And so many poskim, many people who decide Jewish law said that that the good thing about one of these plug-in hot plates is it solves both problems. How does it solve both problems? So number one, they generally do not have a knob to adjust the temperature. So that solves the problem of covering the flames that you don't adjust the temperature. Another option is if it has a knob, just tape it or something, cover it up. But also because it's a hot plate, it's made for warming. So Rabbi Avadia Yosef, chief Sephardic rabbi of Israel, and others said that we're not worried about the rabbinic problem of it looking like you're cooking because that's specifically made for warming. It's called a warming plate. In fact, it's called a plata Shabbat in Hebrew, which means a Sabbath warming plate. So obviously, it's not made for cooking. That's like it's its whole name. And so even though it's directly on something, on a heating element in a sense, it's not a place where you would even be able to cook, or it's not a place where you usually cook, and on it's not a flame, it's not an oven, and therefore it solves both problems. But in a pinch, if you didn't have one of those electric hot plates, you could just cover the flame, or according to some, maybe just cover the knob, and then put something over that, some kind of pot or something else, and then you could put food directly on top of that, as long as the food. Now I'm talking, of course, if food is fully cooked. If it's not fully cooked, you have a much bigger problem, which is cooking on Shabbos. If you take food that's not fully cooked and you warm it up on Shabbos, and it raises to a temperature more than would burn your hand, more than about 114 degrees, what's called Yad Soledadbo, that's considered cooking. And but if the food is fully cooked from before Shabbos, now that this all applies to solid foods, solid, fairly dry foods. Why is a liquid different? So the answer is think about the extreme of a liquid. The most extreme liquid is water, right? So water, let's say, would you say, let's say you have a dry piece of, I don't know, a dry piece of, let's take cooked chicken for sake of argument. Right, you have that. You cooked it fully before Shabbat, and now you warm it up somehow on Shabbat. Would you say you're cooking? No, that would be clearly what we would say that once it's fully cooked, you can't cook it anymore. You're not cooking it anymore. You're not changing its state anymore. It's already fully cooked. You can't make it more cooked. You could burn it, but that's not necessarily that's not the forbiddenness of cooking on Shabbos. So, but take water for instance, right? If you had water, you had a pot of water and you boiled it before Shabbat, and now it has cooled down, would you say that it's already fully cooked and therefore you're allowed to warm it up somehow to a high temperature, and that's not considered cooking? That's not logical, right? It doesn't seem intuitively true. Uh, does anybody disagree? Now, you understand what I mean by that? That's why there's a difference between a liquid and a solid. Because a solid, you change the state by cooking it. You can't cook it anymore. It's already fully cooked. But that's not true of a liquid. It's certainly not water. Right? Water, once it's fully cooked, it's true. You boil it, and now it cools down all the way. So the definition of cooking water is temperature, not state change. Right? The definition of cooking a piece of chicken is state change. But the definition of let's say water is temperature. Cooked water means hot water. Uncooked water means cold water. It doesn't matter whether it was once cooked a week ago or a day ago. It doesn't, I mean, it may kill some bacteria, but it doesn't really change the state of the water at all. So the question in halacha and Jewish law is where along that spectrum does a solid become a liquid, or where does a liquid become a solid? Right? Water clearly is one extreme. Um, let's take this dry piece of cooked chicken on the other extreme. Heating up a dry piece of cooked chicken is definitely not called cooking. It's already fully cooked. Heating up water that has cooled down is definitely cooking because the definition of cooked water is that it's hot. What about chicken soup? Where is that? How do you vote? Do you think that's cooking, or is that cooking or not cooking? If you want to warm up chicken soup, would we say that once it's fully cooked, it can't be cooked anymore, or it's still cooking? Cassie, you're shaking your head. What do you think?
No, I would say it's cooking because you only enjoy it when it's hot. And so
Uh-huh.
then like the state of it would change. Um
Okay. Okay. It's a little bit like water.
yeah, but
Has a
in the
lot of
sense
water in it.
that like you will not eat the soup cold.
Uh-huh.
So
That's
you
not
will
cold
like
soup.
eat.
Cold chicken soup's not cold soup in a way. That's not what we mean by. Okay. Okay. Hear that. How about lasagna? Where does that fall out? It's a hard questions, right? The
How
people pick
do
these.
people who keep kosher eat lasagna in the first place?
No, assuming it doesn't have meat and cheese.
Got it.
Or that it has fake. Today there's so much fake meat and so much fake cheese. It'd be. is you never know what you're eating. Could be.
It's actually hilarious to me that we're bringing this up because I'm starting to try to kush keep my kitchen more kosher.
Mhm.
And a friend, this is so like divine timing. Ashgacha pratit. One of my friends had a baby, and I asked her what I can bring her for dinner tomorrow, and she said lasagna, and I was like, okay, I guess I will try to kosher my kitchen next week because you want lasagna, so I don't have a choice.
Ah, that's funny. No,
But it's
no.
so funny because I was thinking about lasagna today.
Uh-huh, uh-huh. Right. No, I've never even thought about lasagna as anything but dairy. Like I never thought about having meat in lasagna because I never had meat in lasagna. No. I mean, today you could
Vegetable
have it today.
lasagna. Vegetable lasagna is very yummy. Just add
Yeah?
I mean, they
spinach.
put cheese. They put what do you
Spinach and
put?
mozzarella.
You put ricotta, you put mozzarella, you put tomato sauce, place. But yeah, I mean, today the truth is you can make it with Beyond Meat or one of those, or fake. There's also fake cheese that works very well today. But it's interesting. They're also starting to produce lab-grown meat, which is the whole halachic question, because that really is meat, but it's grown from a cell, and that's very different than Beyond or those meat. So that's a whole different
The
halachic
halakhic
question.
question is whether it's kosher.
Whether it's kosher, whether it's meat. In other words, if you take, the cell from a piece of, take one cell from the skin of a cow and you somehow, you take the DNA and you grow cells from it in a lab and you grow a piece of meat, is it meat? What if you do it from a pig? Is that okay? What is that? Right? They're starting to do this. It's in the market now, especially in Israel, I think. I don't know if it is in America. I haven't seen it yet. But lab grown meat is like it's becoming much more popular now.
Israel also has dairy-free milk that's grown from like
You're
milk
right. I
cells,
heard that. I
and
heard
it's
that.
hechshered parv, and the
Such a
Haredim don't know what to
crazy
do
thing.
about it.
Yeah, it's a funny thing. It doesn't have any lactose in it. It must.
I think it might, but because it didn't come directly from the cow.
Right. I mean, it's indistinguishable, I think, from milk and
Yeah.
the meat's indistinguishable from meat because it's actually grown from a cell.
But the
But
Rabbanut called the
but it
milk
was never an
parv.
animal. It was never in an animal. Yeah. Yeah, the robin. Yeah, so I think there's a whole discussion about this now. I have to look into it more. But so let's go back to cooking on Shabbos. So let's take a lasagna. Is that solid or liquid? That's a much harder question, right? How do you measure it? Do you measure it on 51% solid and 49% liquid? Is that the measure? By the way, that's Rabbi Ovadia Yosef's measure. Rabbi Ovadia Yosef's chief was for like 75 years the chief Sephardic rabbi. Rabbi Soloveitchik said it depends if you eat it with a fork or a spoon. This is usually eaten with a fork or a spoon. If you eat it usually with a fork, that's a solid. If you usually eat it with a spoon, it's a liquid. Many people say no, it has to be totally dry, totally dry. And that if it has any liquid, that's not okay. So I think it depends. I think you try and get it as dry as you can. But a lot of times now, if it has, let's say, fat and it's congealed, let's say on a piece of meat or something, and when you heat it up, it's going to turn into liquid, that's okay. You don't have to worry about that. We're all assuming these things are already cooked fully, that I should say. Um, so um, so where you draw the line can be a little bit tricky. Sometimes it's good to ask. But generally we go with fully dry. That's usually we go. Yeah, Brady.
Isn't it true when it comes to like a biblical question, you have to rule more stringently versus a rabbinical?
Very good. Very good. Yes, yes. You're right. So that would be an argument for saying that, if you have a range of opinions, would we call that a doubt? So one question is, let's say you have, this is definitely a rabbinic thing. This is not a biblical thing,
Is it
right?
called
Because, go ahead.
Suffolk?
Suffix means a doubt. So we say suffix dioraita l'chumra. A doubt about a biblical thing is more, you'd be more strict. Doubt about a rabbinic thing, you're more lenient. So this obviously is a doubt about a rabbinic law because it's already fully cooked. So it's a doubt about a rabbinic law. Now the question is, though, how are you supposed to decide who the law is like? From Avad Yosef says 51% dry means dry, and Rav Moshe Feinstein says no, it has to be fully dry. And Rabbi Soloveitchik says, no, it's the difference between a fork and a spoon. So how do you decide? In other words, do you say, okay, if there's an argument among later authorities, that's a doubt. And therefore, this is a question of a doubt about a rabbinic thing, and therefore we should be as lenient as we can. Probably Rav Yosef would be the most lenient opinion. Or no, do you say you need to learn through these different opinions and you need to make a decision? It's not just that. And as a doubt means you're not sure. Let's say you forgot to make a blessing and you can't remember if you did or not. That's a doubt. In other words, just because something is an argument among authorities doesn't necessarily mean it's a doubt. Although some people might consider that a doubt. Yeah. So you're right. If you're unsure, generally you could be lenient. It's generally a good guideline. Um, the what did I want to say? Mm,
I have a question.
yeah, wait, there was something else I want to say about this. Oh, Yemenites. So Sephardic Jews and Ashkenazic Jews both hold the same thing here, which is that you should not rewarm liquids, but Yemenite Jews do rewarm liquids. I'm not sure they rewarm water, but chicken soup they would rewarm because they hold like the Rambam, like Maimonides, who held that even if it's a liquid, as long as it's been fully cooked, it's fully cooked. It's not just about temperature. Uh, just so that you know that. But most people are not Yemenites, and therefore you have to basically just heat up dry things. Yeah, somebody had a question. Yeah.
Well,
Ben, then Meredith, and Brady.
Oh, I thought you were posing the question of what do you do when you have a question of competing
Ah, okay.
Guidance.
Yeah. What do you say?
No, I don't know that. I thought you left that as a
Oh.
hanging question, and you were going to
So
answer it, and then we were
either,
going to know
yeah,
the answer.
yeah. So either you say if it's rabbinic, I'll be lenient, pick the lenient opinion. If it's biblical, I'll pick the strict opinion. Or you ask whoever your rabbi is, and they'll decide. Or if you have a level of knowledge, you could learn through all the opinions and make a decision yourself. Yeah. Yeah, Meredith.
okay, while we're still on the topic of hot plates, I have a question about Chazara because I just don't understand it.
Okay. We'll
Yeah.
talk about that in a minute. Brady, you had a question? I can't hear you. You're on mute.
I was reading Penene Halakha, and they
Uh-huh.
were talking about Hatzah carrying on Shabbos.
Mm-hmm.
And they said that they be usually, like what I said, when it comes to a question regarding biblical law, we're going to rule more stringently. But because of minhag, they give a leeway for the leniency with carrying. But so my question is like, when does minhag override? Isn't that like overriding Torah law in some sense? I have to go back in my book and look at
Depends
it.
what the case is. Let me finish the hot plates and let's go to that. Then we
Okay.
can talk about that case.
Okay.
Okay. So let's see. Meredith just asked about the difference between shehiyah and chazar, which in Hebrew means putting something onto a flame before Shabbat and leaving it there. That's called shehiyah in Hebrew. Chazara means you have something on a flame before Shabbat, you take it off, and now you want to put it back on. So generally, you could, so the laws are a little bit different for both of those.
Before you
Let's
jump
look.
into it, can I just ask the
Yeah,
clarifying question? Does this
sure.
only apply to food that's already fully cooked? Or sorry, does it only apply to food that's not fully cooked, or does it apply to both?
Which?
Uh,
Both of these things?
yeah.
So we're more lenient about putting something onto a heating source before Shabbat and leaving it on there. And then taking it off on Shabbat to eat it, but not putting it back on. So that's called shahiyah, right? That's not chazara. Chazara means replacing it. We're more strict when it comes to you want to take it off on Shabbat and put it back on. Okay? So certainly taking it off on Shabbat and putting it back on, it has to be fully cooked. Now, to leave it on a flame from before Shabbat does not have to be fully cooked. We assume that it has to be edible, which is probably a third cooked. There's another option, which is there's another opinion, which is you could put in a piece of raw meat right before Shabbat. And the assumption is it won't be done by Friday night, and so you won't adjust the flame. Right, let's say a cholent, right? People put a cholent into a crock pot, let's say something like that, or into an oven. So you don't have to cover the flame to do that because you're putting it on before Shabbat, but the food needs to be at least partially cooked. If the flame was covered, that would be a different story. If the flame was covered, it could even be less than that. Let's take a look at. Let's take a look at the Penine Halacha, since I often recommend that. Share screen. If a pot containing food was in a hot oven and the pot was removed, let's see, there's a chat here. Yeah, cooking bishul, yes. If a pot containing food was in a hot oven, the pot was removed from the ovens that food could be removed from it, may not be returned to the oven. There are two reasons for this, right? This is called chazara. You could put food in an oven before Shabbos, but you can't put it back in once you take it out. Why not? That's called returning it. First, since there's nothing reducing the temperature of the oven, it's concerned when you do it, you'll forget it's Shabbat and I think it means nothing. Reducing is a funny word. It means here, since the flame is not covered, we're worried you might turn up the temperature. Second, this action resembles cooking, right? You recognize both of these things. These are both of the two factors which we mentioned. One possible solution to both these problems is to place it in a four-sided metal box inside the oven. Such situation, we're not worried you'll raise the oven's temperature because you can't see the flame, nor does it resemble cooking when he returns food to it. Not everybody agrees to this. He happens to hold this way because he says you don't usually cook food in a box, but the truth is that you do cook it in the oven. It would seem that one may also be lenient if one puts a pan or overturned plate on the bottom of the oven, inserts the food. One should cover the oven knob. So this is interesting, right? In a pinch, this would be a good thing to know that if you had covered the knob, he holds, is pretty lenient. If he holds it seems like what he's saying is, if you have food in an oven and you take it out and you want to put it back, you could do that. Now we'll see. That may be the same case with actually putting it in to begin with. That if you had a pan overturned on the bottom, which is similar to what I talked about before about heating something up on a pot. It's not the way you usually cook, and you cover the knobs. That might be like covering the flame. That might work. Let's see his note here. One may not return a cooked food to the oven for two reasons. You might stoke the coals. Remember that. Put a box inside. Interesting. He's very lenient here. This is assuming that you meet the necessary things that's about chazar. It's about returning something to a flame. This may be different than taking something out of a fridge and putting it onto a flame or warming it up on Shabbos, right? We're talking about something that actually was there at the beginning of Shabbos. Okay, let's see. Let me just go up here. Let's go to section 19. Okay, so chazara, which means putting something back into a heated place. Sometimes one removes a pot from the plot on Shabbat in order to remove food, then wishes to return it. May one take this action known as chazara? According to those who are lenient in placing food on a plot of blech on Shabbat, one may certainly do that. So here's a little bit more strict. Here's talking about a plata. Plata Shabbat means it's electric plates. Okay.
So does the section about the plata basically say that because it doesn't resemble cooking, there's no concern about chazara?
Correct. In other words, if you can take food out of a fridge and put it on a plata on Shabbos, you
Yeah.
can definitely do chazara, which is returning it.
Okay. Because it
Yeah.
doesn't resemble cooking.
Right, right. He does quote more strict opinions here and more lenient ones, but definitely we would hold that that a plata, like the plug-in type that you know about, is definitely does not resemble cooking, and you can't change the flame.
Would you mind sending the link to that in the chat?
Yeah,
Thank you.
this whole section I'll send you.
Yeah, that'd be perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. I think I just Googled panini halacha and cooking. Okay. Earlier we learned that bishul cooking was prohibited by Torah law. Now we'll examine two things. On Friday, here's some situations. Friday afternoon, one may not leave on the fire foods that are not yet cooked. On Shabbat, one may not do things that resemble cooking. As a rule, the prohibitions relating to Shabbat begin when Shabbat begins. Therefore, by Torah law, one may put a pot on the fire before Shabbat, even though it will continue to cook on Shabbat. But the sages were worried that one would be so anxious for his food to be properly cooked by Friday night, he'd turn up the flame on Shabbat. The sages went even further and declared one's food needed more time to cook. Okay, in the past, cooking was done in a mini oven. It was heated by coals. The sages were concerned that one would stoke the coals. Today we cook on other things, and we're worried that you may change the temperature. Even if one were to leave the burners or oven on their highest temperature, rendering it impossible, sages did not differentiate. There are two situations in which there is no concern one will raise the temperature, and therefore one can leave the food on the fire or in an oven from before Shabbos. Number one, when the food is ready to eat. If left on fire, there's no reason to raise the heat. In other words, if the food is fully cooked, for instance, on Friday nights, how do I heat up my food on Shabbos? If you've ever come to my house, you'll know that my food is fully cooked from before Shabbos. I put it in the oven before Shabbos. I set the timer on the oven. I put it on Shabbat mode, but the only thing Shabbat mode does is it stops the oven light from going on when I open it. So if you don't have Shabbat mode on your oven, you can figure that out. But you don't have to cover the flame. You don't have to cover the knob. You can put it in a place where it's usually cooked, because I'm putting the food in before Shabbat. It's fully cooked, and I'm not planning to return it. I'm just taking it off. So that's not a problem. That's number one here. Number two, if the food is not yet fully cooked, be left on the fire if the fire is contained. In other words, if the fire is covered. In the time of the sages, this meant the coals had to be cleared out of the oven or covered with ash. Today, we accomplish this by covering the flame, which is why a plata can be used in situation, or a blech, something, just a piece of metal to cover the flame would be enough. So if the food is not yet fully cooked and you want to leave it on your stovetop or in your oven before Shabbat, then you need to prevent yourself from changing the flame. And it's not a problem of putting it in a place where it looks like it's cooking because you're not putting it there. You're putting it there before Shabbat. But we're just worried you're gonna change the flame temperature because you might want it to be done faster for Friday night. So you have to cover the flame somehow. So some people hold you could do that by covering the knob, but most people hold you would actually need to cover the flame. Food that's already cooked. When we leave food on an open fire on Friday afternoon, if there would be no reason for anyone to raise the food under the flame. So what does it mean, no reason? According to the Rif and the Rambam, if the food is fully cooked, and further cooking would be detrimental, so you wouldn't do so. But if additional cooking will improve the flavor of food, then you can't leave it on a fire from before Shabbat. You'd have to cover the flame. In contrast, the Tosfot maintain that if the food has reached a point where it could be considered edible, we're no longer worried that you're going to turn up the flame, right? So over here, he said you could do it if it's fully cooked. But here he says, actually, it doesn't have to be fully cooked. It could just be edible, a third cooked or a half cooked. There's some argument about whether it's a third or a half. This word here is machol ben drusoi. What does that mean? It means food like the person named Ben Drusai used to eat it. Who is Ben Drusai? So the Talmud explains he was a thief and he was always on the run. And so he would only eat his food edible. He wouldn't eat it fully cooked. And then there's an argument, though, what does it mean edible? Either some hold it means half cooked, some people hold it means a third cooked. That would be edible. And that's called the word in Hebrew, machol ben drusai, food like the person Ben Drusai used to eat means it's edible, but it's not fully cooked. So some hold that as long as it's edible, that would be enough. You could keep it on an open flame on Shabbos. This is good to know, by the way. Let's say that you have a cholent or something like that, and you're putting it, a cholent is a food that can cook for 20 hours or whatever it is. It's a kind of stew that Ashkenazic Jews eat. Sephardic Jews have a version of it also. It's called hamim. It's often made with rice and chicken, other things for Sephardic Jews. And it's something you can put onto a heat source before Shabbat, and then it'll be done during the daytime on Shabbat. So it's cooking for a long time. Typically, Ashkenazic ones are made out of beans and meat and that sort of thing. And you can put it, you don't have to cover the flame. You can put it in a crock pot or in an oven. So the question is, before Shabbat, how much does it have to be cooked? So some hold it has to be fully cooked, but some hold no, it only has to be edible, machol ben drusai, and therefore that would be a third or half cooked. The bottom line is one can leave food on an open flame if it can be eaten as in a pinch. This is the opinion of the majority of authorities, as well as the custom of most Jewish communities. However, lechatchila, that means before the fact, one should take into account the stringent opinion, which he mentioned up here, which is that it should only be if it's fully cooked. Or you can cover the flame, and then you have no problem. Right? Another option is to say, let's say that you had a cholent that was raw. Let's say you want to put it into your crock pot 2 minutes before Shabbat. And maybe it's even vegetarian. So you don't have this way of avoiding it by putting in raw meat. So what do? So the answer is simple. Like, it's true, you can't put it on an open flame. I would probably consider a crock pot an open flame, even though you can't see the flame. Well, some people might think it is covered. But one option is, according to some, cover the knob. In that way, even though the food is raw, we know you won't change the temperature because the knob is covered. If you want to meet all the considerations, you would not only do that, but you take a piece of tin foil and put it inside between the part that comes out and the heating element. You put a piece of tin foil in there, that's a blech. You've then covered the flame. So, and if you cover the flame and the knob, then you've really done a good job. And according to almost everyone, you definitely won't come to change the temperature. You could take a raw cholent and put it into a crock pot that way right before Shabbat, or into your oven for that matter, if you can cover the flame and the I'm not talking about putting something back. I'm just talking about putting it on there before Shabbat. Okay, that's called what Meredith brought up before. It's called shehiyah, called leaving it there. And as he said before, many communities, agree that being lenient is okay, that it only needs to be cooked edible, doesn't need to be cooked all the way. Right here he says, if the flame is covered, you could do that. Okay. By the way, we consider a plot to one of these electric things to be covered, to be considered covered, because you can't change it doesn't have a knob. What if you want to leave food that's not fully cooked in an electric oven on right before Shabbat? It's not fully cooked. So he says you have to do something to remind yourself not to change the flame. I assume he means it's less cooked than even edible, because we said before that as long as it's edible, you could do this, according to many. Because in principle, as long as one covers the oven knobs, right? He's lenient here. He says the knobs are enough. You can leave raw food in from before Shabbat. This is an interesting coup. Put flour and water and other ingredients into a bread machine if the knobs are covered and set the timer to turn on the machine. The bread will be kneaded and baked on Shabbat morning. Isn't that interesting? This food is being cooked on Shabbat, no question about it. But the halacha is that your vessels are allowed to do work for you. Like the Talmud says that if you had a mill to grind grain and it's powered by a hydro mill, you could put the grain in there right before Shabbat, even though it's good. The grinding is going to happen on Shabbat because your vessels will have to do work for you. And so here, he says, if you covered the knob of the bread maker, that others say no, it's prohibited, fearing that it might lead you to cook on Shabbat. Okay. But we hold that you could put food onto a plata, onto a hot plate that's fully cooked, because you can't change because the knobs are essentially covered. By the way, this comes up a lot with coffee, right? It's the same issue with coffee. It sounds stranger when you talk about a bread machine, but coffee seems not so crazy, right? So let's say you have a coffee maker that has a timer, and you want to have fresh coffee on Shabbat morning. So can you put the grounds in before Shabbat and the water in before Shabbat and set it so that in the morning your coffee is going to be ready? So what do you think about that? Seems very similar to a bread maker, right? So what do you have to do in order to do that? Let's say you want to do this, you want to set your coffee maker. What would you have to do to make that permitted? You'd have to cover the knobs and the heating element, the flame. Right, so it's very simple. You take a piece of tin, like if you have a Mr. Coffee type one, you take a piece of tin foil, you put it on the thing so that it covers where the heating element, where the hot part is, and it goes over the buttons, and then you set it all up from before Shabbat, and you should be able to drink it on Shabbat morning. Right? Not everybody might agree, but we would agree. Let's see your question. In practice, most observant Jews follow the lenient position of carrying cities, relying on an Eruv. This leads to an interesting question. Given that half the poskim are stringent, then an Eruv to the best place is not sufficient in cities with streets more than 16 amot, and that is it is irrelevant how many people pass through. How is it that most observant Jews follow the lenient position? After all, it's case that pertaining to Torah law when we're normally stringent. Although, by the way, according to some, almost all of our cities are actually rabbinic places of forbiddenness to carry because of
Oh,
the way our streets are structured. That's one possibility. He's not saying that here. He's saying the simple answer is that in rare cases, when dealing in an issue which is very difficult to be stringent, sometimes the custom takes hold on a lenient opinion, even though this is possible with Torah violations. When does minhag overlap? That's a good question. When does minhag, when does custom, and how does it happen that custom could override what we might think is law?
mm,
Now over here, it's not that there's no opinions that permit it. Lots of opinions that permit it, but there are more opinions that don't permit it. But you're right. The custom is so. First of all, it's possible that our areas are rabbinic, but custom's a very powerful thing in Judaism. It is. Uh, it is. Can be very, very
but
powerful.
so powerful
In
that
fact, it can work the other way also. You could have stringencies that are custom. Right. Sometimes we say minhag Yisrael dinhu, that the custom of the Jewish people is like a law, even though it's not the law, but you have to follow it because it's the custom of the Jewish people. I'm trying to think of a good example. For instance, let's say this. The Talmud says that you shouldn't eat meat and fish together because it's dangerous to your health. Now, we know it's not dangerous to your health, but yet we still do that. Why? Because it became a custom of the Jewish people. That's why it becomes like a law.
but isn't it more questionable if it's deoraita? Like, wouldn't
Right. That was not a, as you're saying, where custom goes against something biblical. But over here, it's a situation in which many people say it is permitted. Now, this is the question of can you, I mean, what you were saying is the question of can you use an Eruv today? Does an Eruv work for carrying in our cities? So some people say yes, some people say no. So why don't we just say, well, it's a doubt and it's a biblical thing, so don't do it. Uh, so um, so he's saying doesn't matter. The custom has become to rely on the lenient opinion.
hmm so like
So it's
if
not that the custom is permitting something that's forbidden. It's that the custom is to rely on the lenient opinion that it's
hmm
permitted. There is sufficient grounds. Now, again, I think there may even be more grounds to permit it, which is that it may even be that our public areas today are actually not biblical, that they're actually rabbinic.
hmm
But
oh, I see. So like if I like have my Siddur and I'm in Baltimore, for instance, and there's some people there who don't carry anything when it comes to Chavez, if I'm in that community, I should kind of uphold that standard versus.
no, I mean, if you have an Eruv in a community, obviously some people use it or they wouldn't have it.
But would it be? I forgot the word for it, but like, let's say I was going to a McDonald's to get just a Diet Coke.
Oh, Mars Ion, that it looks like you're violating something.
Yes, would
Well,
that be?
no, it's if you're in a community where some people use the Eruv and some people don't use the Eruv. So if you use the Eruv, you're just among those people who do use the Eruv. I mean, in Baltimore, not everybody doesn't use the Eruv, or else they wouldn't have an Eruv, right? Half the people use it, half the people don't use it.
Okay,
Yeah,
case settled.
yeah, yeah. So, yeah. Hey, there are some people who won't use any city size Eruv. Um, and many people in Chabad don't use it. Uh, any other questions before we did we
Why?
clarify things? Yeah.
Why won't Chabad use city-sized Eruvs?
Because the opinion, so Rabbi Shner Zalman of Liadi, who lived in the 1800s, and he was a student of the Baal Shem Tov, and kind of the forerunner of he's the part of Chassidut that Chabad came from. He's often considered the first rabbi of Lubavitch. He wrote a he wrote his own book of Shulchan Aruch, Code of Jewish Law. We have many codes of Jewish law in Judaism. The Aruch HaShulchan, the Shulchan Aruch, the Rambam. He wrote one also called the Shulchan Aruch. And it has to do with precisely what Brady brought up, which is in a modern city that has large roads, wide roads, can you use an Eruv, a fence around a city that's not actually made of a fence? It's actually made of a series of doorways. Most of our modern Eruvs are made not of actual fences. It's not like the old city of Jerusalem, in which is an actual fence around the whole thing. They're made of a system of doorways next to each other. In Jewish law, a doorway is formed by two uprights and a piece going across the top. Now, a fence can have a doorway in it. So halachically, what we do is we set up a number of doorways next to each other. And in that way, we can often surround an entire city with a fence made out of doorways. What makes the doorways in most cities? The answer is telephone poles and wires that go over the very top. A wire has to go over the top, or it has to be drilled through the pole. That's how Washington's Eruv is made. It's a combination of fences and poles, but the ones made out of poles and strings are not fences. You can walk through them. They're doorways. But a series of doorways is considered a fence in Jewish law. The question is, can that work on a city-size Eruv? And there's some argument about that way back. If you want, there's a very interesting blog. The first Eruv in America in a modern city was in St. Louis, Missouri in the 1880s. And it was the subject of argument between two well-known rabbis at the time, Rabbi Zachariah Rosenfeld and Rabbi Jaffe, the rabbi who came from Kovna. They both lived in St. Louis in 1888, and they argued about whether you could have an Eruv in St. Louis, because one of the main roads in St. Louis was more than 16 cubits wide. And there were many people living there. And in Europe, they didn't have Arabs in like big cities like that. And so they each wrote books against each other. And you can find those books. They were written in Hebrew, they're very scholarly. You can find them on a website called HebrewBooks.org. You can look at it. There's some drawings of St. Louis in the 1880s. But somebody translated some large sections of these books on a blog called, I think, Eruv Online. And so if you're curious, you want to see it historically, you can see some of their writing. But that was the big question back then, was could you do it? One of the great deciders of Jewish law, the Chazon Ish, who died in, I think, the 60s in Israel, he held that you really could build an Eruv in a modern city, because as I mentioned before, he held that the way our modern cities are structured, they're not public domains on a biblical level, and therefore you should be able to build an Eruv in a modern city, even if it's just made out of these doorways. And that's what we rely on, basically. That's how we can have an enormous Eruv in a city, even though it has many, many people. I mean, we're essentially arguing that the city of Washington is a private home in which there's some food in the Eruv. There's a box of matzah in the Eruv that's owned by everybody communally. One person has to also own the city. I own the city. I bought it from the mayor. I leased it from the mayor for $1 for religious purposes. I have a picture of me giving $1 to the mayor's religious representative. I also own Arlington. I purchased that for $1 from the chief of police. And you didn't know. Now when people say things about the Jews, you're gonna be like, yeah, that might be true. They gotta do own everything. But I don't collect any rent. But so that's the thing. In order to carry on Shabbat, you can't carry in a public domain. You can't carry from a private to a public domain. But you can carry in a private domain. How do you make it a private domain? The answer is you have to have a fence around it. And we check the Eruv every week, to make sure that the fence has not come down. There are actually some wires that we had to put up. There's one that goes across Connecticut Avenue. We had to put up some wires to actually complete the Eruv. There's a rabbi who has a big truck who lives in Baltimore, who we sometimes call down here when we have to fix something as a bucket truck. So there's real work that goes into it, but you have to have a fence, a continuous fence around the city. The city has to be owned at least by one person. And there has to be food that's shared by all of the Jews in the city, in theory, that's accessible to them, and that is, even though they don't know about it, owned communally, and that is often a box of matzah. It's often in a synagogue that has communal access. So all those things are true in this Eruv, and that's why you can carry in Washington, D.C. on Shabbat. Now you have to look at where the Eruv is. You can't carry outside the Eruv. The Eruv doesn't cover all of Washington. It covers a lot of it. East to west, it covers almost all of it. But north to south, it ends near the cathedral. There's another Eruv that picks up a few blocks north of there and covers the northern part of Washington. It's a different community. But the two Eruvin don't overlap, actually. It's a separate Eruv, of course, out in Silver Spring, a separate one in Potomac, many modern cities. If you want to see something very funny, I don't know if I ever showed this to you guys. If you've ever seen, this is so funny. And it was The Daily Show with Jon Stewart. They did a short video interview about the Eruv in West Hampton. It's just one of the funniest things about Eruv I've ever seen. It's called the Thin Jew Line. Oh, here it is. So it's on the Esha Tova website. You can watch it. I'll give you the link. Esha Tova archived it because it's so good. It's just so funny. We should watch it together. It's a riot. Here we go. Maybe we'll watch it now. It's just so funny. Let me know if you can hear this. Can you hear this okay?
I don't hear it.
You can't hear it?
No, there's no sound.
Let me see. I think I have to click something on audio. There's something I have to click for you to hear something I'm playing from my computer. Isn't that a thing?
Yeah, when you hit share, before you actually hit share, there's a box you have to check.
Oh, you're a genius. Is it near share? Let's see. Is it under sharing options or under audio options?
It's under share options. There's a share sound box, and you just have to check that.
Advanced sharing. It's under share. I don't know.
Like when you first click the green share button, a big screen pops up, and it's in the menu on the right side.
Oh, share sound?
Yeah, that.
You're a genius. Wow. Amazing. Good job. Let me know if you can hear this now. Hold on.
Wyatt Cenac traveled to Long Island and filed this report.
Can you hear that?
Yes.
We've all heard about the religious structure that's been enraging Manhattanites. Now a similar controversy is engulfing Long Island.
Call it a holy war in the Hamptons. Residents of the village of West Hampton Beach says the proposal of an Eruv is an outrage.
That's right. A Jewish Orthodox group has been given permission to erect a religious boundary called an Eruv around West Hampton Beach. A structure supporters claim will be harmless.
It's just a religious freedom issue. And if your religion requires that Eruv, you should be able to do it.
But for others, it's an aesthetic issue.
It would totally transform the look of this town, which I enjoy.
What does an Eruv look like, Charles?
Basically, you wouldn't even see the thing. It's a matter...
You wouldn't see it?
No, because it's a line. It could be a thin line running through the poles in the street around the whole area. It really is almost invisible.
Yes, these beautiful seaside power lines will be ruined by this. Wait, this. Over here. See? What is the problem with letting them have a string around the town?
It will attract many, many Orthodox Jews who want to break the rules of their religion.
Oh, so maybe the view he's talking about is less this and more this. The Orthodox want an Eruv because Jewish law prohibits performing daily tasks on the Sabbath. Everything from pushing a stroller to even carrying keys. If I were in an Eruv, can I kill a man?
No.
Oh, okay. If the string is virtually invisible, why not just pretend it's there?
You can't say it's there and it's not there. If you're not involved, it's imaginary to you.
But it's imaginary.
It's real, but it's imaginary in a metaphorical sense.
So it's really imaginary.
It's not quite like Alice in Wonderland.
It's more like Mr. Snuffleupagus? I went to West Hampton Beach to save the town before it became a lawless Wild West. Bank.
You know, it allows them to push their carriages, and it's okay.
But first they start pushing their kids, next they start pushing their Orthodox agenda.
I think that people just need to be more open-minded, and I think it'll all work itself out.
I'm not worried about the Eruv, really.
Restaurants like this bakery are going to have to become kosher.
This bakery's already kosher.
Wow, it's already begun. And what's most shocking are the hardball tactics the Orthodox are using against the established Jews.
One of them tried to explain to me very loudly that she could not shop on the Sabbath, and then I said to her, take your große Tuches, which means very large behind, outside of my store.
That's just seems rude on their part.
Exactly. They are a very closed-minded little group.
That's why Charles and the other open-minded Jews created an organization to keep Orthodox Jews out of their town. Whatever you all are doing, it has to be horrible. You made a 73-year-old Jewish man complain.
I envy him because that's the only thing he's got to complain about is that fishing line up there. Boy.
There had to be a way to bring peace to this troubled land. Perhaps a compromise.
An Eruv hat?
Yeah. Look, huh? Got myself a nice little bacon sandwich and a glass of milk. Check me out. Oh. What's this? Look at me. That's delicious.
Even if you had an Eruv from here to California, you can't eat that.
It's ironic that both groups with 4,000 years of shared history were choosing to ignore tradition. Charles, we should keep the Hamptons the way they're supposed to be. Christian.
Well, I totally disagree with that because the Hamptons are for everyone.
Except apparently these folks.
Yes, we are against their little group taking over our way of life.
And the best way to protect your way of life? Make sure Orthodox Jews can't practice theirs.
Why, it's an act. We'll be right back.
Isn't that funny? It's great. It's a great piece. Okay. Have a Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Thank you so much.
You bet.
Bye.